As a writer of horror fiction, I had always prided myself on my ability to conjure up the darkest and most terrifying of creatures and scenarios from the depths of my imagination. My stories were known for their spine-tingling suspense and bone-chilling frights, and I reveled in the thrill of creating nightmares for my readers. But what I never expected was for those nightmares to claw their way out of the pages of my stories and into my own life. It began with a relentless bout of writer's block that left me sleep-deprived and desperate for inspiration. My mind had become a tangled web of half-formed ideas and incoherent thoughts, and my once productive writing sessions had devolved into hours of staring at a blank screen. Desperation led me to delve into the darkest corners of my imagination, seeking inspiration from my own stories. Night after night, I would read and reread my most chilling tales, hoping to recapture the spark of creativity that had once fueled my writing. But the more I immersed myself in my own stories, the more I began to feel as though the line between fiction and reality was blurring. Shadows danced at the edges of my vision, and strange sounds echoed through the darkened halls of my home. One evening, as I sat alone in my dimly lit study, I heard a faint, chilling whisper, the voice of one of my own fictional characters. It was as if the character had come to life, its presence hovering just out of reach, taunting me with its malevolent presence. I dismissed it as a trick of my overactive imagination, a side effect of my sleep-deprived state. But as the nights wore on, the whispers grew louder, and I began to see fleeting glimpses of my own creations, the grotesque monsters, the vengeful spirits, and the malevolent entities that had once existed only on the pages of my stories. I tried to convince myself that it was all in my head, that the sleepless nights were playing tricks on my mind. But the evidence of their existence was impossible to ignore. Objects in my home moved on their own, rearranging themselves into nightmarish patterns. Shadows assumed unnatural shapes, twisting and contorting in ways that defied explanation. One night, I awoke to find a grotesque figure standing at the foot of my bed, a creature of my own creation, its eyes filled with a malevolent hunger. It reached out towards me with long, gnarled fingers, and I could feel its icy touch on my skin. With a scream, I recoiled from the figure, but it seemed to dissolve into the shadows, leaving only a lingering sense of dread. I was trapped in a waking nightmare, a prisoner of my own creations. Desperation drove me to seek help from a psychiatrist, who diagnosed me with severe sleep deprivation and prescribed medication to help me sleep. But even as I drifted into fitful slumber, my nightmares persisted. It was during one of these fitful nights that I encountered the most terrifying of my creations, an ancient, malevolent entity known as the Shadow Eater. In my dream, I found myself standing in a darkened forest, surrounded by towering, shadowy figures. The Shadow Eater emerged from the darkness, its form shifting and contorting like a living nightmare. It whispered horrifying secrets in my ear, tales of darkness and despair that left me paralyzed with terror. When I awoke, the presence of the Shadow Eater lingered, its whispers echoing in the corners of my mind. I knew that I had to confront the source of my torment, to find a way to banish the horrors that had come to life from my own imagination. With a newfound determination, I returned to my writing, crafting a story that would serve as a prison for the malevolent entities that had plagued me. I poured my fear, my anguish, and my despair into the words, creating a tale so dark and powerful that it could contain the horrors that had come to life. As I wrote, the entities that had terrorized me seemed to weaken, their presence fading with each word I penned. It was as if the act of creation had the power to bind them, to trap them within the confines of the story. But as I finished the final chapter, I realized that the story was incomplete, that it lacked the resolution necessary to seal the entities away for good. I knew that I had to confront the source of my fear, to face the Shadow Eater and the other horrors that had tormented me. With trepidation, I entered the dream realm once more, seeking out the Shadow Eater in the darkened forest. As I stood before the grotesque entity, I read aloud the final words of my story, the words that would imprison the malevolent force once and for all. The entity howled in agony as it was drawn into the story, its form dissolving into the pages like smoke. With a sense of finality, I closed the book, sealing the horrors within. When I awoke, I felt a profound sense of relief, as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The nightmares that had plagued me for so long had finally come to an end, and I could once again find solace in my writing. But the experience had left its mark on me, a haunting reminder of the power of the imagination and the dangers that can lurk within the darkest recesses of the mind. I had stared into the abyss of my own creation and emerged forever changed, a writer forever haunted by the ghosts of my own making.